On a crisp day in October 1949, a Princeton graduate student cockily asked to see the famous Professor von Neumann, founder of game theory, to discuss an idea that might be of interest to the professor. Von Neumann, after listening to only a few sentences, said, "That's trivial, you know. That's just a fixed-point theorem." The student, despite his disappointment, agreed with him. It turns out this supposedly trivial idea may not have been so trivial after all. In 1994, this idea won John Forbes Nash the Nobel Prize in Economics.
Everyone else would climb a peak by looking for a path somewhere on the mountain. Nash would climb another mountain altogether, and from that distant peak would shine a searchlight back onto the first peak.
The idea was later given the name of Nash equilibrium. It is a major breakthrough in the mathematical field of game theory, relating the distant idea of game theory to the modern world and economics. The summer of 1950 was one of the most important times in John Nash's life. Only 22 then, he had been hired as a consultant for the RAND Corporation, a giant think tank made up of America's top mathematicians, scientists, and economists, and dedicated to developing effective strategies for the Cold War. It was at RAND that Nash got into more depth about game theory and encountered the famous prisoner's dilemma. Game theory was founded by John von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern in the 1920s based on the game of poker. It was a theory of the way in which people interact with each other to benefit themselves and a study of cooperation and what one person's best response to another person's actions would be. There are two main types of game theory, zero-sum and non-zero-sum. Zero-sum was the type of game theory that von Neumann and Morgenstern studied. In a zero-sum game, one player's gain is another's loss. There are no mutual gains and no mutual losses. In a non-zero-sum game, there are mutual gains and losses. The prisoner's dilemma was a newly developed theory when Nash arrived at RAND. The story is about two prisoners being interrogated by police in separate rooms. They both have two options, to confess and tell on the other, or to keep silent. Disregarding the actions of the other, each would receive a lighter sentence if he confessed. If one prisoner confesses, then the other should do so too and avoid a very harsh sentence. If the other keeps silent, then it will be an advantage to tattle. But considered together, it is an advantage to both to cooperate and keep silent. The problem is, each of them know the other's incentive to tell. Should they tell or keep silent? Most of Nash's ideas had come to him in a dreamlike way, almost as if he were hallucinating. In the summer of 1949, Nash had started to experience a storm of ideas. Then he only had a rough sketch of his idea. It was not until the next year, when he returned to Princeton from RAND, that he actually began to formulate and consolidate his ideas. Nash wrote a paper in May of 1950 titled Non-Cooperative Games. This paper contained his idea of Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium is the idea that in a non-cooperative, non-zero-sum game, there exists a situation where no player can benefit more than they are right now by changing his strategy. For example, if both prisoners are remaining silent in the prisoner's dilemma, one prisoner will confess, knowing that right now he risks receiving a very harsh sentence if the other prisoner confesses. He can also improve his own situation and receive a lighter sentence by confessing. If one prisoner confesses, the other will do so also to avoid a very harsh sentence. This situation is Nash equilibrium. In this situation, neither prisoner will want to remain silent because if he does, he would receive a harsh sentence. So this strategy is fixed. It will not change because neither prisoner will want to put himself at a disadvantage. The result of Nash equilibrium may not be the best strategy for the individual player. If neither confesses, both would have the best possible outcome for both of them. But each, knowing the other's incentive to confess, would put themselves in Nash equilibrium. The U.S. used Nash equilibrium to determine what the best course for the Cold War would be. For example, for the Cuban Missile Crisis, The U.S. had two options: to do nothing or to respond with a blockade. The USSR had two options: to keep deploying missiles or to retreat. There were already missiles in Cuba, so if the U.S. did nothing, it would be of advantage to the USSR and of disadvantage to the U.S. If the USSR retreated, on the other hand, they would have wasted time and money on the missiles that would not be of any use. The U.S. has an incentive to blockade. The USSR has an incentive to keep deploying missiles. If both carried out their incentives, they would put themselves in Nash equilibrium. If either retreated after they carried out their incentives, it would be disadvantageous. Nash had taken an incredible step in game theory. He had connected the vague, purely mathematical field of game theory with the world. After battling with paranoid schizophrenia, Nash re-emerged in 1980 to the surprise of most of the mathematics community, who had thought him dead. He was beginning to recover and lose his delusional thoughts. He started to do real mathematical research again. In 1994, Nash was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for his 1950 paper, Non-Cooperative Games, along with Reinhold Selten and John Harsanyi for their work in game theory. Nash's work is used in economics, political science, computer science, biology, and conflict resolutions and negotiations. Nash equilibrium was used to found the idea of evolutionary stability, an important concept in biology. It is the idea that once Nash equilibrium is fixed in a population, natural selection will not let another mutant strategy invade. In Nash equilibrium, a strategy is fixed. No player can benefit by changing his strategy. By changing their strategy, the mutant population is putting themselves at a disadvantage. Therefore, natural selection, which chooses only the best and most fit to survive, will choose the unchanged population over the mutant population. For example, giraffes have long necks in order to reach the leaves of the tall trees of Africa. If a mutant species had evolved short necks without becoming carnivores, they would have trouble reaching leaves to eat. Natural selection will select the original giraffe species to survive. Nash equilibrium was also used in the auctioning of third-generation licenses to communication companies. They were auctioning airwaves that could be used for wireless communication devices. Before the Nash equilibrium, the auctioneers would have each company send in a proposal to be judged, and whoever had the best proposal would win the auction. Now economists use Nash equilibrium to analyze cooperation, rivalry, risks, and benefits, and come up with a plan for the auction that would not only give the winning bid to the most appropriate company, but also raise money for the government. They made the rules of the auction, fixed the penalties, and set the reserve price, all using Nash equilibrium. John Nash's life has also inspired a book and a 2001 film, both titled A Beautiful Mind. The film has some inaccuracies. Nash never saw delusions, he only heard voices. He believed not that he was working for the FBI, but that he was the only one who could save the world from alien attacks. Nash equilibrium was not inspired by a girl at the bar. Instead, it came from a storm of ideas in Nash's mind. The inspiration behind the Hollywood film is in reality the story of a genius whose life was filled with difficulty after difficulty, but in the end won all of them to receive world recognition. Ultimately, John Nash's success was because he was someone who was never afraid to tackle the world's largest mountains differently than everyone else, by climbing another altogether and shining a searchlight back onto the first peak.
The only thing greater than the powers of the mind is the courage of the heart.